Good morning, everyone. We're just giving everybody a minute or two just to come into the meeting. So, Kerry, if you want to let me know when we have the majority of people in, then we can probably start. There's just a few more trickling in. I think we nearly have everybody on the call.
Yeah, I think that's nearly everyone now, Jen.
Okay. I'm just keen to make sure we keep to schedule if we can. So, I will run through a little bit of housekeeping, but just to let everyone know, this is being recorded. So, is the slide deck there, Kerry? Yes, great. Thanks so much. Okay, we'll get started there. I think we've nearly got a full house. So, good morning, everyone. You are very welcome to the POMNI 2025 webinar. My name is Gemma Little, and I will be your chair for today. I would just like to take a few moments to outline what we have coming up this morning. I will provide an overview of who Outscape is, and as I just mentioned, outline some housekeeping to ensure we keep to schedule as best we can. So today on the call, in terms of presenters, we have Elizabeth Annette from Outscape, who heads the POMNI research internally, and Duncan Stewart from 56 Degree Insight, who is Outscape's research partner. We are also joined by Maya Taylor from the department, DARA NIEA, and we also have Conleith Donnelly from Sport Northern Ireland. So this webinar will present the key findings from the 2025 headline report, including trends on participation, demand for outdoor activity, health and wellbeing impacts, and inequalities in access to green space since the first POMNI survey in 2020-2021. So before the main presenters take over, I would just like to inform some of you who may not be familiar with Outscape, just to give you a little bit more information on who we are as an organisation. Outscape is a not-for-profit organisation who make it easier for people to enjoy the outdoors responsibly. Established in 1999, we now have a team of 31 staff spread across place shaping, strategic projects, communications and training and participation. We advocate for outdoor recreation, championing and evidencing the benefits, working towards the integration of outdoor recreation into key government policies and strategies. We also develop frameworks and strategies and action plans. We also create high quality green and blue spaces, the planning of that for a wide range of stakeholders. And finally, we also provide sector training, and that's why we're here today. We run a training calendar of events, hosting a mix of online webinars to in-person training. And our most recent training event was the annual Outscape conference, which was held in March this year, highlighting the need for an integrated and holistic approach to planning, developing and managing green and blue spaces. Please feel free to contact Kerry or myself if you would like any more information on our current training events, which we're trying to finalise just for the incoming year. I would like just to run through the next slide, a few housekeeping rules. So you'll just notice that your microphones are turned off until the question and answer session at the end. Feel free just to use the chat function to ask any questions, or feel free to put your hand up towards the end of the presentation and we'll work through the questions at the end. And just a note that the webinar is being recorded, so if you do not wish to appear in the recording, just please keep your camera off, and the recording will be circulated after the event just online through our easing. So with no further ado, I will pass on to our presenters to take over.
Thank you, Gemma. I'll just introduce myself and then maybe I'll get Duncan to introduce himself. So I'm Elizabeth Annett, as Gemma has said, and I am the Training and Communication Principal at Outscape. And as part of my role, I head up our Insights project, so that includes the People in the Outdoors Monitor for Northern Ireland, and the findings of which we're talking about today, our greenspace NI map, which captures all of our green spaces and trails into a digital map. And we've also created tools like the Social Return on Investment Toolkit, which allows organisations to capture social value. So we've got a range of insight tools, and sort of POMNI fits in as one of those key tools within that toolbox. And we couldn't do this POMNI research without 56 Degree Insight. They've been very instrumental from the beginning. So Duncan, maybe you could say a little bit about yourself and your role within it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Duncan Stewart. I'm from 56 Degree Insight. We're a very small research company, just two of us in the organisation. We specialise in research in this area, sort of outdoor recreation, nature, environmental protection, and been involved in establishing POMNI, right? I mean, it's 5 or 6 years since we got involved working with Outscape, and bringing some experience working with equivalent types of surveys in England, Scotland, Wales, UK wide, and still there's a lot of sharing between the nations and so on in order to sort of get the best insights out of these surveys. So yeah, very happy to be here and presenting the latest results.
Yeah, so you'll hear more from Duncan later. He's going to take us into sort of the more nuanced analysis of the data. If you move on to the next slide, Duncan, we'll just give some context to POMNI. So it's funded by DAERA/NIEA and Sport NI to support the cross-government groups of SORG. And what I'm going to do now is bring in Maya and then Conleith, just to provide that kind of like overarching strategic framework in which this fits into. So maybe Maya, you could maybe say something for a couple of minutes about that.
Lovely, thanks, Elizabeth. And just to really set it in that big picture context. Maybe 8 or 9 years ago, the Strategic Outdoor Recreation Group, which worked across government at the time to look at outdoor recreation needs, really identified the needs that there was insufficient data to prove what we have, the things that we knew in our head, both in terms of what and where and how much green space we have, and then how much people use it and what for. We therefore set up a subgroup to look at the need and how we go about that, and working with Outscape, and who then contracted in 56 Degrees Insight, and their vast experience with the similar cross-government People in Nature survey and Scottish People in Nature survey, and the Welsh one that had been going for many, many years, to look at running one of those in Northern Ireland. So first one happened during COVID. This is the second one, which we can take as sort of more normal, although differences maybe aren't huge between those two surveys, to bring us those national statistics that we can use either at national levels, local council levels, and local community group levels, that we can actually think what matters, what is happening, is it changing over time. It is core repeated data about engagement and use. And that will help alongside the Greenspace NI target for increasing the percentage of people, with access to green space, to be used to target need, to target action, to target where funding goes, and should then also help us to draft up the new outdoor recreation action plan, but also all of those other action plans that councils do and that we do across our various sectors of the organisations that are represented here today. So very pleased to fund it, and really wish to credit Elizabeth and Duncan with so much of the work that has happened to complete it.
Thanks, Maya. Conleith, I'll ask if you can come in and say a few words.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thanks, Maya, for covering your section there. My name's Connolly Donnelly from Sport Northern Ireland, and I'm the lead officer for outdoor recreation in the organisation. And we've been working with Outscape from day dot in 1999 through my previous colleague Meg McClure and all the great work he's done out in the outdoor recreation sector. I just want to thank Outscape and 56 Degrees for all their work on the POMNI surveys over this last 5-6 years, and how important it is for us as an organisation in terms of our planning, especially our future plan in terms of investment and programmes and what the outdoor recreation sector looks like. How, in particular, how we've come out of COVID and how we've adjusted to life post-COVID and what that means to the outdoor sector, especially around the environmental impact of what more people in the outdoors means as well, and understanding that. So again, I'll not go on too much. You probably want to see what POMNI has to say this time around. So again, thanks very much to everybody involved and the valuable lessons learned and the insights for us moving forward as an organisation is key, and we hope to continue that relationship with all organisations. So thanks very much, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Connolly. And really, I think a big thanks goes to our funders for making this research possible. And I don't think, it should be understated the importance of this research. Like less than 10 years ago, we didn't have data that was collected, harvested from Northern Ireland to help direct policy and practice in Northern Ireland, and now we do. So to be able to share this, I think is really, really valuable. And we've consulted with lots of organisations whenever we were revising this survey that we ran last year in 2025. So we consulted, with DERA, NIEA, with Sport NI, DFC, Tourism Northern Ireland, our councils, further afield, because obviously, POMNI is comparable with the People and Nature surveys across the rest of the UK. We consulted with Natural England, Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scot, and the Office of Statistics Regulation. So, all those bodies were kind of feeding in to make sure that what we have here is a really useful survey, not just at the Northern Ireland level, but then grossing up to a UK level as well. So I won't maybe linger too long. If you want background information on POMNI, all the resources are on the website. So do go to www.out-scape.com/POMNI, and all the resources are there, including the background information. Maybe, Duncan, could you go on to the next slide? We launched this headline report last month up at Stormont, and we had the DERA Minister, Minister Muir, and the DFC Minister, Minister Lyons, there to help launch it. So we're just going to play a video of what they had to say from that launch.
This new report shows just how important nature and the outdoors are to people across Northern Ireland. With 70% of adults getting outdoors every week and 80% wanting to do so more often, it's clear that access to nature matters to everyone. My department is working to protect and restore nature, as well as improving access so more people can benefit from getting outdoors. When people connect with nature, they're more likely to value and protect it, and that's so important for our environment and future generations.
The POMNI findings are a powerful reminder of the role the outdoors can play in supporting healthier, more active communities. We know that 80% of people want to spend more time outdoors, but for many, barriers like access, facilities, or confidence can still get in the way. So this is a real opportunity. By improving access to local green spaces and making them more welcoming, we can help more people be active, improve their well-being, and feel part of their communities. This directly supports my department's active living ambitions, making it easier for everyone to live healthier lives through everyday opportunities like getting outdoors.
Okay, so today we're going to walk you through some of the key findings, and this really is the tip of the iceberg. So Duncan and I only have the remainder of our time together, and we want to leave some time for Q&A. So we're going to take you through what we see sort of as the key stats and the key insights that are emerging from the report. But the full report is on our website, so please, go there, dig into it. There's lots to learn. There's lots to understand. So moving on to look at the scale of green space use across Northern Ireland. So at our first survey during COVID 2020 and 21, 71% of the population spent time in green space at least once a week. And that's just dropped slightly to 70% of adults getting outdoors at least once a week. So what we're seeing here is that, you know, it's a mainstream activity. And what we saw during COVID wasn't kind of, you know, something that was extraordinary, out of the normal. Actually, getting outdoors, being in green space, being in natural spaces is part of daily life for a lot of people across Northern Ireland. And so whenever you kind of look at different ways of analysing it, you know, it averages at 92 visits per person per year. When you gross it up across the population, you're looking at around 134 million visits annually. So this is mainstream. We're not talking about something that's niche that only a few people do. This is something that's really core to how people live their lives. And I think it's really important for us to get that message across in terms of policy and getting across the importance of the outdoors, is that this is something that people really value, they really use. And if we go on to the next slide, one of the key insights is actually people want even more. So the demand is even higher. We see that 80% want to spend more time outdoors. So there's a really strong demand for people to get into green spaces, to be enjoying outdoor recreation activity. But what we do see is this kind of gap between demands and then the access and the opportunity that they have. Those two things are not equal. And we're going to kind of get into that, because what we do see is that there are populations that are not participating equally, and that can be linked to deprivation, disability, age, as well as loneliness. And I've just got a question here. Don't maybe move the slide across, which is, if you look at these figures and you say, right, well, at least, you know, we've got 70% getting outdoors at least once a week, 80% wanting to do more. This is all a good news story. You know, it's like people love our green spaces. Job done. You know, like, can we all go home and put our feet up now that we've done a good job? But actually, you know, why are we still talking about things like access, these barriers around quality and inclusion whenever participation is so high and demand is even higher? And Duncan, I wonder, could you just take us through why it is actually important to understand some of those barriers that people face?
Absolutely. So if we dig into the data, we can see that while levels of participation and sort of interest and demand are high, there is a degree of inequality, I guess, across the population. This chart, lots of data on here, but on the left, you see that 70% who visit at least once a week. That's the whole adult population. But there are variations. The light green sort of highlights some of those groups where it's below average, and sometimes the differences aren't significant, you know, so it's slightly lower amongst women than men, for example. But you can see a clear sort of decline by age, lower amongst people with no children in their household. That's possibly related to age, but also lower amongst the less affluent socioeconomic groups, people with disabilities themselves or someone else in the household, and so on. So there are a number of variations. And also, you know, that key question, you know, we ask, you know, 80% of people would like to spend more of their free time outdoors in green and natural spaces. You know, you can see when we break that down, it's actually a large proportion of people strongly agree with that statement. There's a lot of demand, and that demand exists both amongst those people who currently aren't very frequently visiting or at all, but also those people who already do spend some time in green space, maybe once or twice a week, but would like to be able to, ideally more so. So what's stopping them? You know, and as we'll come on to, we can see there are clear benefits from that participation in many ways. So what are the issues? Now that 80% to agree, again, that also varies across the population. This is a percentage of people who'd like to visit the outdoors more often. And what's quite interesting to do is kind of look at a bit of the gap between the proportion of those who visit at least weekly, you know, so on a regular basis, and the proportion of people who would like to do so more often. And this sort of the gap, you know, mind the gap sort of analysis here shows that gap is bigger, that latent demand, that unmet demand is bigger amongst certain groups, the ones that are highlighted in the sort of reds and ambers here. So people aged 35 to 49, members of Black and minority ethnic groups, people who have a disability, people who live in the most deprived sort of index of multiple deprivation areas as well. So there's a clear sort of latent demand. There's an interest in increasing participation and spending time outdoors in green and natural places. So what's stopping people? Well, the survey asks people, well, what are the barriers? Which of the following reasons? We list out a range of reasons and we ask people to select any which are relevant to them. And the way we're looking at this data is in relation to, you know, how often people are currently spending time outdoors for recreation. So first of all, looking amongst the group, that small group who never currently spend time outdoors. And as you can see, these are ranked from highest to lowest. Some of the most common reasons are, relate to physical health, personal mobility. Also, there are reasons around sort of a lack of interest, or not liking going on alone, not having anyone to go with. So a confidence related issue. The weather, maybe not a lot we can do about that. There probably are some things, always comes up, but there are a number of reasons. But if we then look at that sort of list of reasons amongst people who are currently visiting the outdoors and green spaces occasionally, less than once a week, but maybe once or twice a month, once a month. And also on the right, the fairly regular visitors going out at least once a week, sometimes it's much more. We can see a whole range of other barriers coming through as kind of restraining people from doing as much as they would like. And we start to see, greater prominence of reasons such as a lack of facilities for, generally, or for people with disabilities, a lack of suitable places to go, fears about crime, antisocial behavior. 1 in 10 people, that's a significant subset, and it's higher amongst certain demographics when we dig into it. And amongst the most frequent participants, it's too dark. And there are other personal reasons, such as sort of being too busy at home, too busy at work. But even there may be opportunities to sort of address those challenges by making outdoor access easier, more accessible in different ways. So a number of barriers which are faced, but a lot of them could be addressed, I believe. Back to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's a really key point around understanding these barriers, because if people can't access the outdoors or green and natural spaces, then they're not able to access the benefits that come along with it. And those benefits are huge, right across health and well-being and nature connection. And in the revised survey that we ran last year, we added in lots more measures to help us understand the motivations and the benefits that people get from undertaking outdoor recreation in green spaces. And it was very clear, from the findings that outdoor recreation supports a whole host of aspects of our lives, our physical health, our mental well-being, our life satisfaction levels, and our levels of loneliness. So it really is, you've got to look at our outdoors, our green spaces, our natural spaces as really a key instrument in terms of, preventative health and keeping our population healthy. And that comes, really clearly through this research in terms of people telling us the importance of this in relation to it. And it's not just in terms of health and well-being, there's huge nature connection benefits as well. And I think that's really crucial, whenever you think about a crisis of our times being climate change, biodiversity loss, connecting people to nature, and therefore helping them to care and to have more environmental awareness. These are going to be key levers that we can pull in terms of tackling these major crises of our time, both in terms of human health and well-being and in terms of nature and climate crises as well. And so, Duncan, whenever I look at this, it's not just, a case of like getting outdoors is just leisure, it's more than that. And if we just slide across there, I think there's kind of a key question that actually the outdoors, our green spaces, our natural spaces, they're actually key health infrastructure. And I wonder, do we sometimes underplay the importance of getting outdoors in terms of all the benefits that it brings? What does the data say around all these huge benefits that we have?
Yeah, well, I think, again, if we dig into the data, we can see people feel that visiting the outdoors provides them with a huge range of benefits, and often the key benefits do relate to health and well-being, but also a number of other sort of quite related benefits coming through too. We asked a question, first of all, we'll dig into this a bit further now, but asking people, well, which of these statements do people sort of believe sort of applied to the last time they spent time outdoors in green and natural spaces? And as you can see, a number of the sort of top answers related to health or well-being, simply saying they felt good, they felt calm and relaxed, refreshed and revitalized. So it's about sort of well-being and calm, but also a smaller proportion but still significant, sort of saying that what they did was vigorous and sort of active enough to make them feel out of breath or sweaty. but also lots of other related benefits, the enjoying the scenery, feeling close to nature. Lots of studies illustrate, academic work, a lot of detailed work done. There is a link between nature connection, health, and well-being, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. Also, substantial sort of proportions saying it's just about getting a break from the TV devices, and the social benefits coming through for many, spending time with family, with friends, other people, and even also, community benefits, a sense of pride in a place, lots of different reasons. And often many people tick a number of these boxes saying, I get a lot, from that simple activity, spending time outdoors in their local park, local woodland, on the beach, can provide countless different benefits across the population. And that's scaled up to those many millions of visits. That's quite substantial. So digging into this a bit further, obviously, these are claim benefits, it's how people feel, it's very important, but we wanted to kind of analyze this a bit further in the survey. So one question we asked people was, well, overall, in the past week, how many minutes of physical exercise have you done in green and natural spaces? And this was doing an activity that was vigorous enough, made them feel warmer, breathe harder, made their heart beat faster. The reason we asked this was we wanted to understand to what extent those sort of chief medical officer targets were being met to some extent or any extent through that outdoor recreation, that time in green and natural spaces. So overall, 14% of the Northern Ireland population met that target of 150 minutes, so purely through time spent outdoors. Others spent a substantial amount of time, between 30 to 150 minutes, so a big contribution towards physical activity sort of targets as well. 36% spent less than that there. It's not to say people aren't, often people will be combining this with other types of activities such as sport and so on. But, it just shows that, the green spaces has this potential to contribute a lot towards these physical activity targets. Again, though, there are variations within the population. That reaching that sort of ideal target, of 150 minutes or so, was 14% overall, but it was actually quite a lot higher amongst people who lived in the least deprived areas. Amongst the oldest age groups, people living in a household where no one has a disability, and people with white ethnicity, it was higher amongst. So some clear evidence of the potential there, but again, obviously we have quite large proportions where it's lower amounts of time spent outdoors, and perhaps there are barriers there which could help sort of to reduce that low level. The other key way that we've looked at the data to try and understand the health and well-being benefits, we asked people, well, how many visits have you made in the last 4 weeks to green and natural spaces? So an overall sort of estimate of how many visits taken in the last month approximately. The average across the whole population is about 7. But if we look at that number of 7 in relation to some other measures relating to well-being, first of all, we ask people overall, how satisfied are you with your life nowadays? Top score is 10, completely. Bottom score is 0, not at all. It's a fairly commonly used measure used by ONS and so on. What we can see is there's, it's not a perfectly smooth correlation, but there is a link there. So people who are rating their life satisfaction as an 8, a 9, or a 10, above that average of 7, in terms of how many visits they take. And at the other end of the scale, people with the sort of lowest levels of life satisfaction, it's substantially lower numbers of visits. Now, we're not saying it's a pure cause and effect relationship, but we're saying there is a correlation between more visits to outdoors and higher life satisfaction. A number of other factors will be involved too, but there is a link. Similarly, we asked people about, loneliness, and again, a standard sort of question that we used, and how often do you feel lonely? The answers ranging from often and always through to never. And so we can see, amongst people who are never lonely, higher visits to the outdoors, lowest sort of average visits to outdoors amongst those who are often or sometimes lonely. So there are clear correlations, there are links between visiting the outdoors, those benefits that we see, such as nature connection, and sort of well-being in terms of these two measures. Now, another key area, it's all interrelated, is nature connection, and a question that we asked, again, it's a sort of standardized question that's been developed over the years by different universities and so on. We use a question which is called the inclusion in nature in self scale. So essentially, we ask people to look at this range of images and ask them which best describes your relationship with the natural environment. Some of you might be familiar with this, and it's to understand how interconnected they are with nature. And the sort of top answer can be a complete overlap between me and nature, and the bottom answer is no overlap between the two circles. So it's quite a nice question. Respondents like it. And if we categorize together the people with the largest, the top three boxes, about a third, 34% of the Northern Ireland population, we classify as having a high connection to nature, 28% a moderate connection to nature, and 39% a low connection to nature. But there are differences by demographics, as you might imagine. People most likely to have that high connection to nature, to be in these top three boxes, include members of the Black and minority ethnic population, the oldest age groups, people in the more affluent social grades, men and residents of rural areas. All, not huge differences, but statistically significant differences, all of these, in terms of more likely to be in that sort of top set of ratings. Flip side, though, the people most likely to be in the low connection to nature, people with a long-term illness or disability, the youngest age groups, those in the least affluent social grades, and residents of the 10% most deprived areas, and women slightly more likely as well. So some demographic differences, and obviously it's interesting to unpick what's going on there and the reasons why. But how does this all sort of come together? I've shown you a few different measures over the last few charts about frequency of visits, nature connection, and so on. So what we can do though is we can look at, our non-visitors, our people who visit the outdoors and green spaces less than once a year or never. Our occasional visitors, so that's once or twice a month, every 2 or 3 months, they're spending time outdoors. And our frequent, that's our people who visit at least weekly. And what we can see, if we look left to right on a number of measures, is that there are correlations. Again, we need to be careful about cause and effect, but there's clearly a link here between levels of nature connection. So people who visit the outdoors most often have a much higher sort of average nature connection using that scale that we just talked through of the overlapping circles. So you can see a clear link. But it goes beyond that. We also ask people about how concerned they are for the natural environment, a 5-point scale. And this shows the sort of top sort of levels of agreement. And so you can see people who visit the outdoors frequently are somewhat more likely to agree that they are concerned about protecting the natural environment. And it goes further as well, in terms of actually taking action. We have this sort of value action gap often between people who care and people who do things, the say-do gap, So people who visit the outdoors more often are also more inclined to take any pro-environmental actions. Even if we strip out maybe some of the easier to do ones or the more sort of mandated ones, such as recycling or switching off lights, appliances, which might be motivated by different reasons, such as saving money, we can see a clear sort of, higher levels, especially a jump between the non-visitors to the sort of natural spaces and the occasional, and things like activism, and also, take it small numbers, but much higher in terms of spending time and looking after, taking an interest in local green spaces, much more likely to happen amongst people once they're out there visiting and appreciating their local green spaces too. So some clear and very interesting relationships there. And a lot of this has been shown in other studies elsewhere in the UK and further afield as well, suggesting that the real positive benefits from allowing and encouraging people to visit the outdoors and getting rid of some of these barriers that are stopping that latent demand. So back to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Duncan. I think this nuance analysis is really enlightening in terms of helping us understand, groups within our population that are able to access the outdoors relatively easily, and therefore, are accessing all those benefits, be it health and well-being, nature connection, and then that also then maybe transferring through to kind of more pro-environmental behaviours. And in other groups where, as you say, Duncan, there's the flip side where they're really struggling. And one of the things that POMNI really helps us to understand is these hidden inequalities that we have around access to green space, the quality of the green spaces that they have near to them, and issues around inclusion. So, mobility, feeling safe and welcome, and having the facilities that you need to make your experience at that green space enjoyable. So we do have these clear barriers that come through in the research, access obviously being the main one. Whenever we ask people, you know, how far do you have to walk to get to your local green space, you know, only 17% are reporting that they could walk to their nearest green space within 5 minutes. So that's, you know, that's lower than 1 in 5. It's not great. Other barriers that we see, you know, is a lack of transport. So again, if you're having to go longer distance, if you don't have the transport, that's a huge barrier. You can't get there. Then whenever you have green space, if there's limited facilities, if you've got poor health and mobility, and again that comes back to limited facilities, so if you don't have the benches and places of rest, and perhaps, you know, the signposting that you need to feel confident getting around, etc., or good quality paths, you know, all of these things can be a hindrance. Safety concerns, so again that comes back to quality and inclusion. If you feel that actually it's not a safe space to be in, that's not well cared for, etc., that's going to impact in terms of your frequency of use and wanting to go there. And even that sort of more personal feeling that people have, that the outdoors just isn't for people like me. And I think that's, you know, something that we can definitely change and challenge. You know, it doesn't have to fit a particular stereotype of person. Everybody can benefit from getting outdoors. So those are sort of the key barriers that are emerging. And it brings me on to a question, which is to say, you know, is it just about distance? You know, because often we can just talk about, you know, the importance of proximity of green space. You know, so is it just a case that for some people, you know, the outdoors is close to them, they're able to get out every day, it's part of their life. And then on the flip side, you've got those that say it's just not accessible at all. So is it just about distance, Duncan, or is there something deeper going on that we need to understand?
Okay, so yeah, well, first of all, I mean, if we look at the distance, you know, that's this result regarding how long it takes people to walk to or to get to their nearest green space. It's certainly part of the picture, but we'll dig into that a bit further to see is there more to it than just that. So, you know, we do see, you know, that the ideal sort of distance, 5 minutes or walk or less, which equates to maybe around about 400 meters. I think it's been worked out. 17%. So, you know, a minority of the population claim and believe that that is the distance, and that relates both to geographical distance but also their own ability, how long it takes to walk, and then that is a factor within that as well. The larger proportions are in these sort of, you know, 6 to 10 minutes, 11 to 20 minutes walk, you know, so you know, further afield. But actually some people, you know, it's much further, it's more than half an hour, or they don't know, so suggesting, you know, that they're less unclear, you know, they're not familiar with where their nearest local green space is, which is a concern as well. If we focus in on that 5 minute walk or less, that sort of ideal distance, what we can see now, this is looking at that percentage, so it's 17% across the whole population, but is it how it varies in relation to how often people spend time outdoors in green and natural spaces. So there is a, you know, more or less clear correlation here. So, you know, at the top end, people who visit the green spaces every day, 28% say that their local green space is within that 5 minute walk or less, you know, so they've got very close to home, easy to reach green space. And then if we move down, you know, we get to the people who are visiting less often or never. You know, it's not a perfect curve here, but, you know, there's a clear slope here. So there's certainly a correlation between how often you visit the outdoors and green spaces and how close, you know, your local green space is that you understand it to be. We can also look at that same 17% on the basis of demographics and where people live. So the light green sort of flags the areas, you know, the groups, demographic groups and geographic areas where it's lower than average, dark green where it's higher than average. So, you know, essentially what we're seeing though is that it's lowest amongst certain groups. It's actually, in terms of age, it's both the youngest and the oldest age groups, and it might be for different reasons. It might be linked to where people live. It might be linked to, you know, the pace at which they walk, even, you know, possibly. So you know, a 5 minute walk, you know, is going to be a different distance for different people in different age groups, potentially to some extent. People with a disability are less likely to say that their nearest green space would take them 5 minutes to reach, and most notably, one of the biggest differences is this one here. It's regarding deprivation, using the index of multiple deprivation applied to people's postcodes. Residents of 10% most deprived areas, 12%, so a lot lower than that average. 70% said it was a 5-minute walk. And also we've seen this across our deeper analysis in this area, an urban-rural split. Generally, people living in urban areas closer to green spaces, that are accessible and suitable for recreation than rural residents. But it's not just about proximity. It's not just about having somewhere there. It's got to be somewhere that's inviting and appealing, and that is, that feels safe. And so we did ask people, to think about their nearest local green spaces and then to rate them, in terms of to what extent do they agree or disagree with each of these statements. And so a lot of green on the screen, which is good. There's a lot of sort of support and positivity coming through, in particular, sort of ranking them. Most people agree strongly that their local green spaces are easy to navigate, have signs and paths that are suitable, are safe and welcoming, are rich in nature and wildlife, feel well cared for. But as we go down, we begin to see more of this sort of, middle of the road or sort of lower rankings as well. Most notably, green spaces being easy to get to without a car. A substantial minority of people, a large chunk of the population say, I disagree with that statement. And also, a large chunk of the population are sort of sitting on the fence or negative towards the amenities and facilities that they need, in their green space, such as seating, bins, etc. as well. And we, in our reporting, we've dug further into this to understand who are the reds and yellows, where do they live, and what are the differences, going on here? Because we want to see this green across the board, really, so that green spaces are both close but also appealing and suitable for visits. Okay, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Duncan. So hopefully you're beginning to sort of build a picture here of what's happening in relation to outdoor recreation across Northern Ireland in terms of the barriers. So the barriers being a lack of local access, lack of transport, limited facilities, and issues around inclusion. And the groups that are impacted most are those with a disability, those from the most deprived areas, and those living in rural areas. And that it's not just a case of there's a lack of local access, there's also issues around the quality of green spaces that people are having to use. So those are kind of the key insights. These are insights not just so that we can be much more knowledgeable, but to also inform our action in terms of what we should be doing going forward. So what needs to happen? We, in the last survey, we put in some new questions to help us understand public sentiment on key areas. And that's really quite helpful in terms of understanding where the public sit on key topics in relation to investment and the management of green spaces, because what's clear is that people really value our natural spaces. They want to take part in more outdoor recreation and spend more time in green spaces, but there's a big challenge around how we remove those barriers and improve access and improve quality so everyone can benefit from that. So we did ask some of the questions in relation to public support. Duncan's going to, in a minute or two, walk us through some of those, but the key ones being is that 90% of the Northern Ireland population support investment in our natural spaces. So they do see our natural spaces as something that do warrant more funding, more investment to increase the quality of them and to increase the provision of access. And that we do also see this linked to, as I say, there's other crises that is connected to this. We see that 68% are concerned about the climate and biodiversity impacts on their local green spaces. So they want something to change, they want a step change. And in terms of unlocking the full potential of outdoor recreation right across health, environment, and our communities, we've listed there 4 things that's emerging from this research that needs to change. So number 1 there is improving local access to green space, investing in quality and facilities, and removing the social and practical barriers. We know that people are motivated, so they have that motivation to get outdoors. The demand is there. However, there are actual real barriers that are stopping them, and that we need to see joined up cross-sector solutions, because the benefits are, they're across government priorities. It's not just linked to one department in terms of the benefits that we're seeing. So therefore, we should see much more joined up working here in terms of taking outdoor recreation forward in Northern Ireland. And it just poses a question, if you just move the slide across, Duncan, that, the demand is clear, that we have high demand for accessible natural spaces, but access to those and the quality of those green spaces and natural spaces are not keeping pace with what the public want. And so, Duncan, I wonder, could you just share some of the kind of deeper insights that we have around the public support to see a step change in our current provision?
No problem. Yeah, so another set of statements that we shared with our survey respondents, and asking them to what extent, if any, they agreed or disagreed with each of these, to kind of assess, to what extent people are supporting, local green spaces, access, etc., in the context of everything else that's going on in their lives and so on. And the general response, as you can see, is that a lot of people agreeing strongly, more than half agreeing strongly with the statements we said regarding whether people believed access to good quality green spaces and trails was essential for good physical and mental health. So, as we saw earlier, a lot of people have personally experienced that. The majority of people who spend time in green spaces, whether that's on long distance walks or just taking their dog for a daily or twice daily short walk, are saying, yes, I feel better for it, physically and mentally. And so there's support and agreement. Yes, that's very, very few people disagree. Let's say it's 1%, Also, similar, very high support around green spaces and trails receiving funding, really important, and being maintained to ensure that they're welcoming and enjoyable. And that builds upon some of these other responses where people are saying, I'd like to more, but I'm concerned about lightings, I'm concerned about safety. People providing slightly lower ratings around things like seating and bins and so on, the facilities they want to make their green spaces and trails welcoming and enjoyable. Most people agreeing strongly that they need to be well funded. And the third one, with a vast majority agreeing, mainly strongly, are that trails and green spaces should be included in government and council plans to improve communities. People see these as community assets. You can see how the benefits are not just selfish sort of personal ones around health. It's also about community cohesion. A lot of the benefits people like to see other people using, and this can build upon itself. The more people using their facilities, the greater the safety and the benefits from that. So lots of support across. I won't go through all of the statements. Funding and support for green spaces, these being prioritized as well. And even towards the bottom of this scale, we've got the one that's got the most mixed opinion is, I would like to have greater involvement in developing and maintaining my local green nature space. That sort of personal involvement, we're talking about people perhaps volunteering or contributing to discussions and planning their local green spaces. So it's not surprising that we don't have the vast majority saying yes, putting their hands up, because that kind of thing requires commitment. But actually, I would say 18%, almost 1 in 5 of people saying, yes, I want to get involved, I strongly agree, is a positive. So it suggests there's a real appetite for more maybe volunteering and getting involved, at a local level within communities. So lots of positives here about, next steps and support from the population, certainly. So back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Duncan. I think your term there, that there's a real appetite, I think actually that's a really good way of sort of looking at this, that there is a real appetite from the public in terms of inputting, shaping, taking care of our green spaces, and wanting to see more investment, more leadership, better management of those going forward. And that's really clear in the research. Now, as I said earlier, we've only had time to sort of scratch the surface here. So the full report is available on our website. So please go there and you can go through all the pages of the report to dig into more insights and statistics that are available there. We're also interested to hear from you. Is there any sort of particular angle you would like us to explore in the data that we have? Then please reach out to us and we can look into that. Just in terms of further analysis that we are doing, if you could go on to the next slide, please, thank you. We've got 3 deep dive reports that will be being published next month. So the first one is looking a little bit more at engagement with outdoor environments for active living and health and well-being. So we'll dig more into the statistics around that and demographic groups that are participating and getting those health and well-being benefits, and those that are facing greater barriers. So again, that will provide good insights around physical activity in the outdoors. And then we have a second report around people's perceptions of access to natural spaces. With this one, actually, we're doing a new thing. So we've obviously got the POMNI data that we're deep diving into, but we're also pulling in insights from our greenspace NI map. So that will be really interesting to see how those two insight tools can bring us even more knowledge and understanding around what we can do to improve access to our natural spaces. And then the last one is around connection to nature and nature recovery. So looking again at the nature connection metrics that we have within the survey, and then the pro-environmental behaviours and the correlations between those two. And again, that will be really illuminating in terms of helping to think what we can improve going forward there to ensure greater connection to nature. So look out for those 3 reports. We will probably do another webinar, maybe late summer, on those to help you walk through the findings. But as I say, the full resources are on our website, and if you'd like more information, please do drop me an email. But for now, what I'll do is I'll hand back to Gemma to facilitate a Q&A time.
Okay, and thanks Elizabeth and Duncan. I think full points for finishing, perfect time. You've got a few moments left for question and answers as well. So I've just got one there to Duncan, that there's similar data for the rest of the UK. Are there any differences between the outcomes in Northern Ireland versus the UK?
Broadly speaking, things are consistent, I would say. You know, that there are small differences, but generally, I mean, one thing that we have in other parts of the UK is more of a sort of long-term trend analysis. So, you know, which we obviously don't have for Northern Ireland yet, because this is a new baseline survey almost. But yeah, generally, I would say, you know, there's a lot of consistency. What we're doing increasingly, though, and this is through the sort of Elizabeth is involved in as much as myself, is having conversations, meeting, sharing data, even looking at ways to sort of align the surveys done so that we can compare. Because often surveys have been set up with slightly different questions, so it's a bit annoying. You can't quite compare, but there's more efforts to make sure that everything sort of can be compared, because that's really, really valuable to say, well, so what is that a good level or is that a low level? But I would say generally Northern Ireland is up there and equal with sort of the measures that I've seen for Scotland, England, Wales. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mike, thanks coming at it from an environmental point of view. Just he would be interested to explore views on how we increase pro-environmental behaviours and responsible/sustainable usage. So is that something then that we can look at? Maybe that's going to come in the deep dives, Elizabeth, then, is that?
Yeah, that's something that we can dig deeper into in the connection to nature and nature recovery deep dive. So there's different ways that we can kind of cut the data there, Mike, to provide some insights on that. So just hold fire a little bit and see what we can produce in that deep dive in relation to that. It may be sometimes with these surveys, there are like evolving information needs. So it could be in the next survey, you know, we can make further amends if there's particular information needs that have changed or become more important. So I think this is where it's quite an iterative process, where it's actually really good to get the sector's feedback, because it's really important for us that the survey is actually relevant in terms of the data it's providing. But wait to see what we can do for the deep dive, and then if there's anything further in the next survey, then do let us know, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Tammy has asked, do we have any deeper understanding of the feeling of women and girls with regards to access to the outdoors, especially with regards to safety?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
sorry, Elizabeth, you want to go first?
Well, I was just going to say, Duncan, you can come in after me, because you will probably have greater detail on this, but because we do capture data across male, female, we can then cut the data to look. So whenever we look at those ratings of green space, which include things like, feeling safe and welcome in your green spaces, etc., we can look and compare that across the sexes. So yes, that's possible. Duncan, do you have anything further to add there?
More or less, yeah, absolutely. And from what we have seen so far in this, and also you're bringing in some of the we've done specific sort of reporting. I remember in England we did some work specifically comparing sort of male female responses. It's clear, sadly but not surprisingly, that safety, lighting, barriers around these sorts of areas are much more prevalent amongst women than men. So it's much more of an important issue to address. It really reinforces that and the sort of feelings of confidence around spending time in green spaces.
Okay, thank you. Just wondering, there's a note there with regards specific facilities. Was that highlighted within the responses? Somebody has just asked. I'd be curious to find out what specific facilities did people ask for. Was that broken down any further, or was it just?
We didn't really have a sort of open in what facilities specifically. I mean, some of the analysis we've done, and I'm thinking back to more like the previous POMNI, where we've looked at which groups want more facilities, and we kind of prompt with that, e.g., toilets, seating, bins, and so on, and some of the questions, but it's often quite straightforward things. I mean, toilets is always a big one. It comes through in these sorts of surveys. For obvious reasons, it's not often anything. It's the safety, it's the lighting, it's the smooth pavements. It's a lot of we see is access. With increasing age, often more so. It's about just being able to feel confident. So it's these sorts of simple facilities, you could say, but missing often. And sort of issues around sort of cleanliness and so on. So people saying, well, bins, dog waste bins, that kind of thing come through. But we don't have an open-ended question where we dig into what exactly do you need. I think it'd be very localized as well, that sort of response too.
Okay, thanks, Duncan. There's just a note there with regards that DAERA and DFC seem to be invested in this project, but there's maybe merit for the Department of Health reviewing this, and also with regards to social prescribing working well in some communities, and then also maybe there's space maybe for the likes of the Department for Education being involved with regards being involved in the outcomes, given that the closure of the outdoor education centres recently. So
yeah, no, I would agree with that comment, and I'm sure Maya and Connolly's, from their perspectives, will welcome other departments jumping on board to provide funding for this kind of research, because yes, the insights relate to health, relate to communities, relate to our broader infrastructure and active travel, etc. We did reach out to for the stakeholder engagement. We did have input from those. I guess the challenge has been then to secure funding. But going forward, of course, we would welcome discussions, and we will be sharing these insights, across the departments to hopefully build up interest in the POMNI research, and to show them what insights it provides, right across their own policy priorities that they have. So yes, I would be totally in agreement with Tony's point there.
thanks, Elizabeth. Just a question with regards the data, just in terms of the detail. Does the research provide any insight into how young people access the outdoors, for example, through school, outdoor education centres, youth groups, with family?
The survey doesn't really do that specifically. It's a survey of households, it's a survey of sort of individuals. So we do ask people about children in party and if they're with children. So that's more the family side of things through other members of their households. It's a survey of adults, so often it's their children. It doesn't go into we don't survey schools or education groups or so on. So I don't think it really addresses that. So maybe other sources for that kind of information though, Elizabeth, I don't know.
Yeah, so the POMNI survey surveys those 18 years plus. So we don't get the views of children, unfortunately. It's just the way the omnibus survey is run. I know in England they do run a separate survey for children. So to do that for Northern Ireland would require a different survey, and of course there's just different protocols you have to follow, obviously, around then surveying younger people. But we do have insights around there, you know, so we do ask questions around, you know, for
Yeah.
example, on your last visit, who did you go with? And we do actually have a breakdown of age brackets. So we do get an understanding, was it with very young children, or is it, you know, was it slightly older children? So there are those kinds of insights, but no, it doesn't go down to the specifics around, did you go with school, or did you go through an outdoor education centre or a youth group? We don't have that level of detail, unfortunately. I think that's I think, I'm sorry, Jim, I'm just going to say there that, you know, with POMNI, we have got like a short set of questions, you know, so I think we've got less than 25. And, you know, we're incredibly grateful for the funding that allows us to run those 25 questions and to get 4,000 responses across those. Other surveys done across the UK can have up to 50 questions, so obviously they can ask a lot more, whereas our challenge is to kind of get as much bang for buck in terms of harvesting insights from each question. So we can't cover everything, unfortunately. That's sort of the pressure that we have.
And you've just answered my question, Elizabeth. I just wanted to remind us that the size and scale of, you know, the sample size. So, you know, it's fairly robust data that we're getting here.
Yeah, so it was 4,000 adults surveyed across the 4 seasons. So from memory, it was last January, April, July, and October. So that kind of then allowed us sort of to capture insights across sort of seasonality variations, and 1,000, you know, for each of those months. So that it gives us a sample size of 4,000, which then means that we actually can dig into quite a lot of detail for different demographic groups, because it's weighted accordingly. I don't know, Duncan, if you want to provide more sort of technical info on the
I mean,
sample.
it is that kind of best sort of optimal sample size. It's 4,000, it's seasonal, but with 4,000, if you're interested in a group that's just like 5% of the population, you can do that. That's still 200 responses, you know, or so. So it allows us to drill down, I suppose, you know, so we get the big picture, but we can also get into quite local or specific demographic groups. It's always one where it would be lovely to have a longer survey, lovely to survey children as well, because we could get so much more. But I guess it's about the realities of budgets and getting as much quality data and good data out of what we can, what we do. So I think it's quite a good model, certainly, and we get a lot from it.
Great. Okay, Elizabeth, anything else you want to say there just before we sign off?
No, as I say, we've got the 3 deep dives coming. We will hope to run another webinar, because I think they are a useful way of walking people through the data, particularly for the deep dives where it is a bit more complex in terms of how we're analysing the data. So through coming along to that, it's probably a good way of kind of getting your head around what the insights are. So we will circulate information probably over the summer in relation to those, Gemma.
Great. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Duncan, Elizabeth, Maya and Conley for today. That's been really useful. Kerry has kindly just popped up the last slide for us there, just a little feedback form. If you can grab your phone just before you leave, take a couple of minutes, scan the QR code and complete the survey. Just give us a bit of a feedback on that. It would be really useful. And thanks very much for your comments. Kerry's also just popped it into the chat there too. So it's great for us. And as Elizabeth said, then if there's any other information or areas you would like us to drill down into, please provide that on the form or contact Elizabeth directly, and we can look at that for the next round. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you on the next one. Thanks.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.